Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my series, Executed Justice for Justin Root. Today, we are going to be going over some of the findings from both of the investigations. If you recall, there was a multi jurisdictional investigation into the death of Justin Root, and it involved both the DA from Suffolk County, or the ADA, I should say, from Suffolk County, and our good old friend Michael Morrissey from Norfolk County. So we will be reading through their reports in this episode. Before we do, I want to make a very quick announcement. I apologize sincerely for not getting these episodes out faster. I really want to get them out weekly, and my goal is I want to get them out Sundays on a weekly basis. However, just it hasn't been working out health wise. I've been struggling with 4 to 5 day migraine and other things. So just apologies. My goal is I want to try to get these on Sunday afternoons. And I'm going to really try to stick to that. It's just been a little more difficult lately, but I'm going to try to do that. Anyways, let's get started. Please hit the like button. And so first, I want to go over, we went over in my timeline episode a little bit about this, and this is my slides from that episode. So Michael Morrissey, pictured here in his hostage video for the Karen Reed case, Michael Morrissey says in March 20th, he comes out with his report. Remember, the incident for Justin Root happened on February 7th. So, is it 7th? Why am I doubting myself now? Let's go to page 2. Yes, February 7th. Okay, now I lost my page. Hold on one second. Okay. So, yeah, a little over 30 days it is. March 20th, he comes out with a report. So February 7th, the incident happens where he is gunned down, broad daylight, in two separate incidents by law enforcement. And here we have within, let's say a 45-day window, DA Morrissey releases a 14-page report clearing all of the officers of wrongdoing. Morrissey claims a black handgun, which is a Crossman pellet BB gun, was found at the scene. However, several details of that are disputed, but we're going to learn what he says about that, and we'll go from there. So that is a little preview. Here, I did talk about this in my timeline episode, but just in case, since I just brought it up, some of the major discrepancies with that black gun, as you see pictured here, this is the actual gun from evidence. Um, there were different claims about where it was located. Different officers said shoulder holster, Root's right hand, recovered underneath Root, or it fell from Root's chest when they moved him. And they can't all be true. So somebody's not telling the truth. Many somebodies are not telling the truth here. Different claims as to who found it. Trooper Keneally stated that Officer Figueroa retrieved it from Root's right hand and gave it to him. At that point, it slipped from his hands and he dropped it in the mulch. Officer Brenda Figueroa does not say the same thing. She never states this, and she doesn't remember when or how or where the situation or circumstances were when she saw this gun because she was so traumatized and she couldn't remember. And then she just brought up tears during her interview, so just trying to make people feel bad for her. Some more discrepancies regarding its condition. Keneally states that it was bloody despite no blood being found on the gun. So it was found in pristine condition. As you can see, there's no blood on the gun. And also, there were injuries in Root's right hand, which caused the paintball gun that he was holding to shatter. However, If he had been holding this gun, then that would have caused some damage or shattered it or whatever. There's no damage whatsoever to this gun regarding where Justin was holding it. So as you can see, it's pristine, clean, pristine. Doesn't quite fit their uh, description of how they found it. So just keep those things in mind as we read Michael Morrissey's report. I think that's important to remind you guys of that. So I'm glad we went over that. Hold on. Let me see if there's anything else that we should cover. No, that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it here. So, like I said, we had a multi-jurisdictional investigation. Brigham and Women's Hospital, that incident happened in Suffolk County. Originally it was investigated by Rachel Rollins, who was removed from office for her own illegal things that she was doing. And then the case was taken over by interim DA Kevin Hayden, who then became the DA, as far as I'm aware. Um, so that's for Suffolk County. But it wasn't Kevin Hayden who wrote the report. It is a Dolly, something Dolly. Will ADA Dolly. So we'll read that as well when we get there. All right, so let's get started with uh, this is Michael Morrissey's report. Remember, this report comes out like within 40 days. All right, so Commissioner William G. Gross. This is to the commissioner and the Colonel Christopher Mason of the Massachusetts State Police General Headquarters. So, dear Colonel Gross and Colonel Mason, Commissioner Gross, I said Colonel, didn't I? Dear Commissioner Gross and Colonel Mason, this letter addresses my review findings and conclusions. All right, I apologize. I had to pause really quick and rush out the door with the dog. So hold on. I don't know where I left off or if I even started reading. So, oh, sorry. Elderly dog, and sometimes she doesn't make the outdoors so much. So I gotta rush to get her outside. And she made it, so yay. All right, so DMI. This letter addresses my review findings and conclusions regarding the events of February 7th, 2020, culminating in the fatal shooting of Mr. Justin Root in the vicinity of the intersection of Route 9 and Hammond Street in the town of Brookline, Norfolk County. This review was undertaken in keeping with MGL Chapter 38, Section 4. Each of the 6 officers involved in the shooting gave a voluntary recorded statement. A list of documents, reports, statements, audio, and video recordings reviewed is attached as Appendix A. I'm just reading the words on the page. If these people don't know how to put together a grammatical sentence, that's on them. Just saying. Appendix B describes exhibits mentioned throughout. Facts of the case. On February 7th, 2020, shortly after 9 a.m., Boston police officer Michael St. Peter was positioned in his marked cruiser in the area of the Brigham and Women's Hospital parking garage when a member of the Brigham and Women's Hospital security approached him. The security officer relayed that a male had just flashed a gun at him when he asked that the man move his car. You got a footnote here that says the Brigham and Women's security officer later interviewed stated that when he asked Root to move his car, Root answered by opening his coat, displaying what the security officer took to be a gun. What he took to be a gun, because it wasn't a gun. At the time, Boston Police Dispatch broadcast instructions to officers operating in the vicinity to respond to the hospital campus for a man with a gun. Officer David Godin and Officer Michael St. Peter responded. Officer Godin arrived at the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, initially looking for a black Chevrolet Volt. The video evidence collected by Brigham and Women shows an armed Root chasing Brigham and Women's security officers. He was never chasing any security officers. That is inaccurate. Um, but they are saying that that is what the video evidence shows. We see him on video get out of his car and approach a security officer, and they engage in a conversation, and the conversation ends with them shaking hands. So, how scared was this officer? Root can be seen attempting to misdirect Officers Godin and St. Peter in their vehicles when they first arrived on scene. What? Officer Godin circled the hospital building and came back upon Root's silver Chevrolet Volt stopped in the travel lane on Fenwood Road and with its door ajar. He stopped, exited his cruiser, and approached the corner of Fenwood Road and Vining Street on foot. As Officer Godin approached the corner of Fenwood Road and Vining Street on foot, he immediately encountered Root, whom he still did not have reason to know was the suspect of the call. Root was moving towards him and yelling, "I'm law enforcement, I'm law enforcement." As Root came within a few feet of Officer Godin, Root reached into his waistband and pulled what appeared to be a handgun out and aimed it at Officer Godin. Officer Godin gave instructions to drop the gun, raised his own weapon, and began to retreat. Officer Godin fired his weapon and fell backwards on the sidewalk. Root began to struggle with Officer Godin on the ground. No, Root fell on the ground because he was hit by Godin and St. Peter, or St. right? St. Peter? Yeah, St. Peter. And he fell. He stumbled and fell, but they're saying that Root struggled with the officer? Not so much. Before he exited his vehicle, Officer St. Peter's view of the scene was initially blocked by by a large Coca-Cola delivery truck that had stopped near the corner of Fenwood Road and Vining Street. As he moved towards the corner, he observed two men struggling on the ground, then one man holding what appeared to be a handgun standing over another person and pointing the handgun at the person on the ground. Oh, that is such a lie. Trying to say that Justin was standing over Godin with his supposed gun and threatening Officer Godin. Officer St. Peter had heard shots fired and presumed the standing party was shooting at the man on the ground. Officer St. Peter did not yet know that the person on the ground was another Boston police officer. This is not how it happened at all. Why are there no repercussions for these people that lie? These public officials that lie in their public official documents. This this did not happen. I'm enraged reading this, and I can't. What happened to my? Oh, I froze up there. Sorry. I'm enraged reading this, and I can't even imagine how enraged the family must feel having to read through this stuff and seeing the many. Well, first of all, they probably got this and were like, I don't know why my camera is being so slow. Okay, maybe that's a little bit better. Yeah, so to the family of Justin Root, this is enraging. And God, you guys have a lot of strength to get through this. Um, to have all these officers and public officials lie about your loved one in the incident that happened. And originally they probably only had this information. They didn't have, things probably came out slowly, started leaking more and more. They probably didn't have all this information, so all they had to go on was what law enforcement and Michael Morrissey was saying was fact. And you know, trying to come to terms with the fact that their loved one may have been doing these things that the officer or that Morrissey and all these other officers are saying that he did when he absolutely didn't. So, I mean, it's just like the mind games that these DAs and officers will do. So, anyways, sorry, I had to get that out. Officer St. Peter heard shots fired and presumed the standing party was shooting at the man on the ground. Officer St. Peter did not know yet that the person on the ground was the Boston police officer. Officer St. Peter fired his weapon at Root. The Boston Police Ballistics Review indicated that 15 shell casings were found at the scene. So 15 shots were fired at the Boston scene. Just there alone, 15. So potentially Justin could have been struck 15 times. Potentially. Root can be seen on video limping back to his Chevrolet Volt following that confrontation, corroborating the officer's belief that bullets they fired struck Root. An adult male working as a parking valet in the area of the hospital was struck by a bullet during the incident. These events are the subject of an investigation by Suffolk District Attorney Rachel Rollins. Remember, Rollins had it first, now it's with the other DA. All right, so Root successfully entered his vehicle and began to travel towards Huntington Avenue and Route 9, eventually entering that roadway and proceeding westbound on Route 9 towards Brookline. Google.com's mapping function estimates the distance from the point of departure to the place where the Volt crashed and stopped to be 3.2 miles. It's under 4 miles for this whole incident that took place. Officers Godin and St. Peter got back in their cruisers and began pursuit. Officer Godin updated Boston Police Dispatch concerning the altercation, and BPD Dispatch put out a Code 303, which informed all area law enforcement of an officer involved shots fired incident. Subsequent transmissions from Boston Police Department dispatch informed officers that an individual had been shot in the area of Brigham and Women's and that the hospital campus was in full lockdown. Reports from witnesses were being given to security personnel and police at the hospital and were conveyed to the Boston Police Communications Center regarding the armed assailant on the hospital campus. A number of early calls and reports provided to police indicated that the assailant had shot the valet. Really? Because, okay. Background transmissions heard in Exhibit 8 also indicated a victim, a valet, was shot in the head. The only people that got injured were from law enforcement. So the two injured people, that would be Root and the valet, both of their injuries were sustained by law enforcement. Also, I would beg to differ that or not beg to differ, but I would argue that the accident that happened due to the pit maneuver that one of the officers performed on Root's car during the car chase, those injuries would also be at the hand of law enforcement because they caused that pit maneuver to have him lose control and they escalated that situation. All right, moving on. Additional police units joined the pursuit as it progressed. Near the beginning of the pursuit, a Boston Police Department cruiser struck the suspect's vehicle in an unsuccessful attempt to disable or stop it. As the chase continued, the Volt began to accelerate and weave through traffic, causing pursuing officers to lose sight of the vehicle near the intersection of Route 9 and Chestnut Hill Avenue. Having lost visual contact, several officers, Officer Godin among them, kept going west on Route 9 while Officer St. Peter, among others, detoured down side streets, which might have provided another route of escape for the fleeing suspect. The speed at which Root's vehicle was traveling accelerated considerably from Boston to Brookline, traveling at speeds estimated in excess of 70 and 80 miles per hour. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they're exaggerating to make it seem like Root was being, dangerous or something. He absolutely did speed up after um after the pit maneuver, but to to how fast he was going, we don't know for sure. The Volt struck multiple vehicles at the signalized intersection of Route 9 and Hammond Street within sight of Star Market Supermarket with an attached parking lot. The event is captured on a Brookline traffic camera. The event data recorder, or the black box, from the Volt was downloaded and revealed that the Volt was traveling at 90 miles per hour 3 seconds before the crash. Okay, I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe they do have that information. Maybe it's a Michael Morrissey fib because he likes to lie. So who knows? Officers came upon a chaotic scene, and I would still argue that he was going that fast because he was being chased and he was afraid and he was hurt and injured and he was trying to get away from the people that were hurting him. Officers came up upon a chaotic scene with multiple heavily damaged vehicles and pieces of vehicles strewn about the roadway. Massachusetts State Police Trooper Paul Keneally had been patrolling west of that location and proceeded westbound on Route 9 with the intention of deploying so-called stop sticks in the path of the fleeing vehicle to end the chase. Trooper Keneally traveled through the intersection of Hammond Street and Route 9 eastbound when he saw a streaking vehicle to his left heading westbound towards the intersection. He realized it was the suspect's vehicle. Trooper Keneally made a U-turn and headed westbound on Route 9 and came upon the scene of the collisions at the intersection. The initial officers on the scene involved in the shootings were Boston police officers David Godin, Brendan Figueroa, Corey Thomas, Joseph McMenamy, Leroy Fernandez, and Massachusetts State Police Trooper Paul Keneally. All officers were dressed in full uniform and operating marked cruisers. Officer St. Peter's route brought him to the vicinity of the Star Market parking lot on the opposite side of the lot from the crash along Route 9. Officer St. Peter, arriving after the police officers fired, readied his canine partner in case the dog was needed. He did not discharge his firearm at any time, but he was interviewed um, at any time in Brooklyn. He discharged it in Boston. He didn't discharge it. Remember, he's St. Peter's the one that was in the Boston scene, and he did discharge his firearm multiple times at Justin in Boston. But when he arrived at Brookline, the firings had already occurred by the time he got his car parked and his dog out. All right. So Root's heavily damaged vehicle had come to rest just west of the intersection. Blood was subsequently observed both inside and outside the Chevy Volt. He exited his car and began to flee on foot in the direction of a mulched area in the Star Market Plaza roadway entrance. A female patron of the shopping area was aware of the crash and saw Root exit his car and fall down. The woman began to approach as if to render assistance. Root regained his feet and continued towards the berm area covered with landscape mulch. Simultaneously, Officers Godin, Figueroa, Thomas, McMenamy, and Fernandez were exiting their vehicles. Trooper Keneally pulled ahead and close to the Boston officers, exited his cruiser, and joined the loose line that the police officers had formed facing Root. Police commanded the woman to get away from Root. Officers also began shouting numerous commands to Root to show his hands and get on the ground. These commands are clearly audible in the body-worn camera footage from Officer Figueroa, as well as the recordings of Boston and Brookline police radio transmissions. Bystanders in the area also confirm hearing numerous commands being given by the police. Trooper Keneally was preparing to tackle the suspect in order to subdue him, but was warned by a Boston officer that the suspect had a gun and that the gun was in the area of his chest. Trooper Keneally stopped and drew his firearm. Trooper Keneally, Boston officers, and bystanders reported that Root did not comply with any police commands. As officers continued to shout commands for Root to show his hands and get on the ground, Root instead moved his hands inside his jacket, consistent with reaching for a handgun with the type of shoulder holster he was wearing. Multiple officers observed the handgun. More than one officer yelled, "Gun." Simultaneously, 6 officers opened fire to stop the threat. Why? Why? Just why? I mean, if he had a gun, were there not other ways to subdue him and get the gun away from him? You had to just shoot, all of you, just shoot, not ask questions, not think twice about it, just gun and just start shooting. Is that protocol? If a suspect has a gun, you just shoot? I don't. Is that what they're supposed to do? Is that what they train you to do? No, you de escalate the situation. You try to make sure that people aren't harmed, including the gunman. You try the best you can to get the gunman safe and unharmed as well, not just everyone around you and the officers. You also try to assess the situation. They didn't even do that in this. But I've talked about that at length. I don't even want to get into that. They just came in guns a-blazing and were ready to shoot. And it's clear. Someone yells gun and everybody just shoots. The entire shooting incident lasted less than 3.5 seconds. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner has, as part of its preliminary investigation, informed the Norfolk District Attorney's Office that there was evidence of 26 entry wounds on Root's body at autopsy. 26 entry wounds at, on Root's body. It's not certain which wounds occurred in Boston and which in Brookline. And I skipped a footnote earlier. It says the officers were not shoulder to shoulder, but spaced in a rough line. So they all kind of lined up, but not exactly shoulder to shoulder, I guess. A Massachusetts State Police preliminary ballistics review found that a total of 31 shell casings from 6 officers were found at the scene. All shell casings have been matched to identified weapons. All the officers' weapons. All weapons in this case have been officers' weapons. Root was on the ground near a cluster of bushes in the mulched area. Body of Mr. Root and some faces have been blurred. Okay. There's pictures attached to this report, I think, or maybe it's the Boston report, but either way. All right, so Trooper Keneally, in keeping with police training, began to command several other officers to holster their weapons while others kept their weapons out. He and Officer Figueroa approached the suspect. Some officers reported Root's hands were moving. The 2 officers took control of his hands and repositioned him on his back. In doing so, they observed a shoulder holster and what appeared to be a black semi-automatic handgun. The handgun was subsequently determined by state police to be a black Crosman C11 4.5mm CO2 powered semi-automatic BB pistol. This is that black gun that Justin didn't have. According to his family, he did not own this. So where did it come from? EMS arrived on scene to render medical assistance to Root within moments. He was transported to the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center but did not survive. The medical examiner informed Boston and state police that her preliminary findings are that Justin Root's cause of and manner of death are expected to be homicide by multiple gunshots from law enforcement weapons. Standard of review is Graham versus Connor, established the objective reasonableness standard for officers' use of force. The case provides that officers' use of force is judged based upon the totality of the circumstances from the perspective of the officer on the scene at the moment force was used without the benefit of hindsight in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. The so called Graham factors used to determine reasonableness, as set forth in the case: 1. The severity of the crime. There was no crime. 2. Whether the subject was an immediate threat to the officers or not, or others, I mean. No, he wasn't because he wasn't armed. 3. How the subject was actively resisting arrest or how the subject was attempting to evade arrest by flight. Well, he wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't resisting anything. The officers just started shooting at him, and then he tried to leave. Yes, he did try to leave the scene. As one officer called it, he was fleeing the officers who were firing at him. So, I don't think this meets any of the prongs here that they're asking for. Okay? I just debunked Graham versus Connor for this case in 3 seconds. But Michael Morrissey's too dense to see that. All right, so Norfolk District Attorney's findings. Justin Root was in and around the campus of Brigham and Women's Hospital on the morning of February 7th, 2020, shortly after 9 a.m. Root threatened and pursued, did not, Brigham and Women's security officers, including brandishing and displaying what would be perceived to be a deadly weapon, a handgun. Brigham and Women's security personnel were put in fear, communicated their perceived threat to Boston police, and placed the hospital in a lockdown. Boston police transmitted over open radio channels the report of a party with a gun on the Brigham and Women's campus and dispatched units. Root is identified as misdirecting police officers who responded to the hospital campus. Two officers believed they were firing. Two officers believed they were being fired upon, and one physically struggled with Root on the ground before Root fled the scene. Following the altercation at Brigham and Women's Hospital involving Boston police officers' gunfire under investigation by Suffolk County, Root fled the scene in his Chevrolet Volt, with multiple officers joining the pursuit as it progressed down Route 9 into Brookline. During the pursuit, Boston Police Dispatch broadcast the fact of the officer involved shooting the wounding of an individual at the Brigham and Women's location, probably the valet, and information relative to the chase. Those transmissions led all involved officers to believe that they were pursuing an individual who had just shot someone who was still armed. They believed they were chasing someone who was armed. Okay. But he also didn't shoot anybody. And so they're thinking that Justin shot the valet, even though he was face to face with Officer Godin and didn't shoot Officer Godin. And the valet was in an opposite direction and the trajectory doesn't work. But okay, he shot the valet. And so that's why they're chasing him. He's just some armed guy that they're chasing. Whatever. These officers are dumbasses. Sorry, but they are. Officer Godin had become separated from his portable radio during the initial altercation with Root. Officer Godin heard radio transmissions in the cruiser and had obviously made his own observations relative to the present dangers when he arrived in his cruiser in Brookline. Officers arrived at the site of the high-speed collision at Hammond Street to see a chaotic scene and heavily damaged vehicles. Officers observed Root fleeing the area of his disabled vehicle on Route 9. Boston and state police officers loudly and repeatedly issued appropriate commands that Root should show his hands and get on the ground. Right, as you're simultaneously shooting him. Got it. He's supposed to do anything while you're also shooting him at the same time as giving the commands. Like it happened that fast. Officer Fernandez observed Justin Root Ignore commands to show your hands and instead reach into his jacket in a motion consistent with drawing a firearm. Or maybe he was struggling to breathe, maybe he was having chest pains, maybe he was dying and putting his hands up to his chest because he was suffering. Maybe your stupid police commands didn't mean anything to him because he was in the middle of dying and couldn't stop himself from trying to grasp at his chest while he was grasping for air or whatever. And as we had heard from Shirley, I forget her last name, the Good Samaritan who tried to help him, she said his eyes rolled back in the back of his head before she was forced to leave his side. She said his eyes were rolling back in the back of his head, meaning like the lights were not on anymore. So how would he even be able to take those commands and hear them and do something with that? If he was unconscious and his body was just moving involuntarily, how would he have been able to respond to officers' commands? Okay. So Officer Fernandez observed Justin Root ignore commands of show your hands and instead reached inside his jacket with a motion consistent with drawing a firearm. Officer Fernandez fired his service weapon based on the suspect reaching into his coat and the fear that he could be shot or killed himself, or that another person at the scene could be shot or killed. Officer Corey Thomas observed Justin Root not complying with police commands instead, with his arms along his body at his chest. His arms along his body at his chest. That makes no sense. Arms along his body at his chest. From his vantage point, he could clearly see the subject's arms, but not his hands. He observed his arms moving, heard a round fired, and thought it was Root firing at his fellow officers. He stated that he discharged his firearm to protect other officers. Officer Brenda Figueroa observed Justin Root not complying with police commands and, from her vantage point, observed what she perceived to be a smirk as he reached into his coat as if to pull out an object. She saw what she perceived to be the handle of a gun where he was reaching. She was in fear that she or another person present was going to be shot and discharged her weapon. Massachusetts State Police Trooper Paul Keneally observed Root exiting his car initially fall to the ground, regain his feet, and begin to move again. As he was moving to tackle Root, he heard a Boston officer say that the subject had a gun and that the handgun was on his chest. Trooper Keneally drew his weapon rather than execute a takedown. He observed Justin Root not complying with police commands to get on the ground and show his hands and instead reached into his coat as if to retrieve a weapon. He was in fear for his life and discharged the weapon. Officer Joseph McMenemy first approached the disabled Chevrolet Volt and found it empty. And then saw a male running and ordered the woman who was approaching him to get away. When she withdrew, he pointed his firearm at the suspect and ordered him to get on the ground and show his hands. He observed Root begin grabbing at his jacket, revealing that he believed to be what he believed to be the backside and handle of a handgun housed in a shoulder holster in the area of his chest. When he observed the subject reach for what he believed to be a handgun, he became afraid that if the subject accessed that handgun, he would be shot. At that time, he discharged his weapon. So, Officer McMenemy says he was still standing when this happened? Because, I mean, if you're telling him to get on the ground, wouldn't he be standing? I don't know. He was not standing. He, as we know, kind of had a moment of his eyes falling back in the back of his head, as our Good Samaritan told us, the EMT. When Officer David Godin first encountered Root at Brigham and Women's, He saw what he perceived to be a firearm tucked into his waistband. He heard Root yell, "I am law enforcement," before reaching into his waistband, retrieving the perceived handgun, and pointing it at him. Officer Godin fired his handgun, fell backward, and thought if he did not get up, the subject was going to kill him. He regained his feet and attempted to resume firing, but the gun jammed. He participated in the vehicle pursuit, and once at the scene in Brookline, he was among the officers shouting commands for Root to show his hands and get down on the ground. He observed Root reach into his jacket, heard someone shout gun, and fired his weapon. He believed, based on the interaction at Brigham and Women's and his actions in Brookline, that it was the subject's intention to kill responding officers. Really? Well, that's just false. But okay. In addition to the realistic looking handgun found on his person, an inventory of Root's vehicle revealed two identical paintball type handguns, one of which has been damaged. Explain to me how an identical paintball handgun how does that match a BB gun? How is that identical? Two identical paintball type handguns. How are those identical to the black BB gun? The paintball guns were clear plastic. The handgun, as you saw, looked like a real gun. The BB gun that they say he had. Yeah, I think somebody's lying, and I think his name is Michael Morrissey. A civilian witness, a physician driving to work at a Boston hospital, was traveling eastbound on Route 9, but stopped at the Hammond Street intersection due to a red light. His attention was drawn to the westbound roadway by the sound of a loud crash. He observed Root limping away from the road and eventually up the berm that separates the road from the parking lot. He states in his recorded interview, quote, and as he reaches the top of that area, the police cars had already arrived, and the police officers were already on foot with their guns drawn, running after him, and he came to a stop, so they did too. They did so too. So they did so too. Okay. Now they are all facing, pointing their guns at him, cannot hear exactly what they are screaming because everybody was screaming, and at the time they actually said probably three, four times while pointing their gun at him. He turned around facing the officers, and as he did, with his right hand, he took his right hand under his coat, and at the time that happened, the police officers discharged their firearms on him. In light of the consistent narrative of events emerging from law enforcement interviews, video footage, audio recordings, and civilian witnesses for each of these six police officers, I find that the use of force by police in Brookline was objectively reasonable and justified, according to the factors delineated in Graham versus Connor. In light of these findings, the Norfolk District Attorney's Office will take no further action relative to these six officers as to the performance and execution of their duties on February 7th in the town of Brookline. In fact, they all probably got promoted for all we know. So that is the DA's report on that. We do have an appendix. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it does list all of the different things that are in evidence. I highlighted that black handgun because I question it. And other than that, there was nothing really that I wanted to note regarding this. There are, mm, I'll read this. This is Appendix B, brief description of referenced exhibits. So Exhibit 1 is the body worn, no, BWH, exterior Fenwood Road middle camera, whatever that means. So it's a camera on a road somewhere. The video depicts Root's arrival and stopping in the middle of Fenwood Road with his flashers on. Root is seen running up Vining Street. Root misdirects officers Godin and St. Peter. How does he do that? Both of the officers subsequently returned to the intersection of Vining Street and Fenwood Road after looking for the suspect. The altercation between Officer Godin and Root. Root can be seen limping away, getting in his vehicle, and the pursuit begins. Exhibit 2 is the front camera of something. I don't know. This video depicts the Coca-Cola truck parking the Root en route running up Vining Street, chasing two security guards. He was probably running up to them to talk to them. Officer Godin comes on scene and is misdirected by Root. I don't know what that means. How is he misdirected by Root? What does that even mean? Shortly thereafter, another car driven by Officer St. Peter is also misdirected by Root, who is pointing up the street. A security guard from Brigham Women's Hospital can be seen pointing down the street at Root. Officer St. Peter makes a U-turn and travels to the intersection of Vining Street and Fenwood Road and parks his vehicle in front of the Coca-Cola truck. Root again is seen on the sidewalk next to the Coca-Cola truck and the building chasing a security guard up the street with a gun drawn. Officer Godin comes around the corner of the building and sees Root, who quickly draws his gun and aims at Officer Godin. Officer Godin falls to the ground and he attempts to retreat. So, what is it? I'm sorry. He's just running around chasing security guards with this gun, but yet he also had to pull it from his holster to shoot Godin. So, or shoot, threaten Godin. So, is it in his holster or is he running around with it in his hand? I'm so confused with the description of how things are taking place because I think they're just making a bunch of this up. The video, Officer Godin comes around the corner of the building and sees Root, who quickly draws his gun and aims at Officer Godin. Godin falls to the ground as he attempts to retreat. The video depicts the altercation on the crosswalk between Root and Officer Godin. Root limps away, heads towards his car, which is out of view. Root is seen driving off in a Chevrolet Volt, and the pursuit begins. Exhibit 3 is a rear door camera. The camera depicts the intersection and crosswalk area of Vining Street and Fenwood Road where the incident took place. The camera view is aimed up Vining Street and depicts the area where you can initially see Root's head in the middle of the bottom of the frames. Root can be seen running up Vining Street when the Coca-Cola truck pulls up, chasing a security guard. The security footage of the officers retreating can be seen in Exhibit 1. Officer Godin drives by in his cruiser. Root can be seen heading back towards where the vehicle was parked. Root can be seen pointing and misdirecting police. Officer St. Peter's blue lights are visible as he is turning around behind the Coca-Cola truck. Root goes running up the sidewalk in front of a passerby to chase another security officer when Officer Godin arrives at the entrance of the Shapiro building. Officer Godin is facing an oncoming Root. Guns are drawn, and Officer Godin retreats. One can see a portion of the altercation just to the side frames of the video. Root can be seen limping away. Officer Godin can be seen climbing into his vehicle to begin the pursuit. Exhibit 4 is a still photo of Root aiming a gun at Officer Godin and Officer Godin drawing his gun on Root. Exhibit 4 is Root pointing a gun towards Officer Godin and Officer Godin pointing his gun at Root. Exhibit 6 is a still of Root pointing his gun at Officer Godin. Same thing. Okay. They're just in different intersections. Well, they're all on Vining Street. No, it just said this one just says Vining Street and Fenwood Road, but the other ones are just saying on Vining Street. So I don't know. They must be different angles. The parties pointing weapons at each other is another still. Officer Godin is retreating and crouching, so now he's falling away. Exhibit 8 is a witness statement. A woman employee of Brigham and Women's Hospital. So Brigham and Women's, what is that? Body worn camera footage timestamp corresponds to the coordinated universal time, not Eastern Standard Time. Okay. So this is a witness statement. A woman employee, not a female, just a woman employee. Just the way that they write these reports, man. I'm an English major. I know it doesn't sound like it, but my reading of English communications, because I slur my words nowadays with my autoimmune diseases, but I really am, and it drives me nuts the way that these officers write in their reports. There's no real grammatical rules. So this employee of Brigham and Women's Hospital, who was also interviewed at or near the location where the valet was shot, saying that the suspect Root was seen with a handgun. She says in the interview that Root shot the valet. So this woman says Root shot the valet when we know that's not true. Is the DA's office just getting people to say whatever they want? Because I really do think that could be the case here. Exhibit 9. Traffic camera of the town of Brookline captures the moments of the crash at Hammond and Route 9. The camera pans the area and follows Root's vehicle to its resting place near the mulched area at the entrance to the mall lot. The video also shows Root exiting his vehicle and trying to get away. Root falls down, and a bystander can be seen coming over to render assistance. Root gets up, the police arrive, and the woman is seen moving away. Exhibit 10 is a still of Root's vehicle at the initial crash. So is 11 and 12 and 13. Exhibit 14 is Root opening the door of his vehicle after the crash. Exhibit 15 is Root out of the vehicle at the area of Route 9. Exhibit 16, Root getting away. So these are all just photos of. Now we've got drones. Yeah, I'm not going to read all of these. Basically, they have like photos and things to support their evidence of whatever their narrative. Exhibit 24, the body camera worn by Officer Figueroa depicting her arrival, officer commands, and weapons being discharged. It also depicts some of the period after the shooting. The city of Boston has an audio delay when body cameras are turned on for 30 seconds before audio can be heard. Well, that seems counterintuitive to catching what's happening in real time, especially if you're supposed to turn it on when something's happening, because they don't just have it running all the time, which they should. That should be a rule for all law enforcement everywhere. Body worn cameras 24/7. This exhibit has been edited, including blocking out the body of Mr. Root at the scene. A portion of the video is almost completely blacked out by Officer Figueroa's arms when she draws her weapon. Exhibit 25 is a body camera. The camera worn by Officer Corey Thomas and depicts the police officers lined up in the area where the police discharged their weapons. It depicts some of the steps and commands that were given after the incident by a state trooper, Paul Keneally, including orders to holster weapons and the commands necessary to approach Root and take him into custody. Officers are heard being concerned that Root's hand was still moving as Trooper Keneally and Officer Figueroa approached. One officer announces that there is a gun near Root's chest area. Pictures of the handgun that they supposedly recovered, pictures of the paintball guns, pictures of Root at Brigham and Women's campus with the handgun running past a bystander, and the holster, picture of the holster worn. So those are all of the things that they reviewed. All right, so that is Michael Morrissey's review. But we still have the Suffolk County review. So Dolly is his name. John Dolly is the ADA. Approximately a year later from the incident, we get an answer. So about 30, 45 days, whatever, 40 something days from the incident, we get word from Michael Morrissey. He says, I reviewed everything and here's my narrative. This is ADA John Dolly for the Suffolk County, and he also comes up with similar conclusions and findings. And of course, the DA, Kevin Hayden, who he works for, agreed, whose office he works out of, agreed with Dolly's findings. Oops, I didn't mean to change that page. All right, so he stated that the officers both thought Root had a firearm and thought that they heard him fire it, and he concludes that there were no violations. So we're going to read that. Again, this is a year later, so the family's sitting there waiting, and we've also been through, the timeline. We've had other things happening with the family suing and other lawsuits and whatnot happening in between this and in between the DA's finding and this. So, or I should say, Norfolk County's finding and Suffolk County's finding. Been a whole year. All right. So this is the report regarding the investigation into the shooting slash use of potentially deadly force involving Justin Root on February 7th, 2020 at the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, Boston, Massachusetts. So one thing I want to mention is that they were mostly, Michael Morrissey was mostly responsible. I'm sorry, guys. My Wi-Fi sucks today. It's been going out, so the fact that I'm recording it all is probably a miracle. Maybe I'll just turn my camera off because it's annoying me. Um, all right. So basically, DA Morrissey is supposed to be. Why does that just do that? DA Morrissey is supposed to be reviewing the Norfolk County. So the stuff that happened in Brookline. But did he really like do a deep dive into that? I'm not so sure. I didn't really notice that he did. It didn't seem like he did a thorough investigation into that. It was basically a reiteration of what we already know. It was Brookline. Well, I mean, at the time, I'm sure they didn't know it, but what we know now, it's like a reiteration of, what they think happened from Boston to Brookline. So they gave us both instances, both separate instances in his report. I don't think he went into great detail about either instance in Brookline or in Boston. Brookline, the one that he's supposed to be doing. So I feel like that report was just lacking a whole lot of thoroughness. But that's just me. All right, so now let's see what the Suffolk County DA's office says. On Friday, February 7th, 2020, at approximately 9:20 a.m., the Boston Police received a 911 emergency call from security personnel at Brigham and Women's Hospital alerting police to a person with a gun at 60 Fenwood Road, Boston. 60 Fenwood Road is within a one-block area which encompasses hospital buildings. Responding officer David Godin was confronted by Justin Root, who pointed a replica of a firearm at him. Godin drew his firearm, retreated, and fell backwards as Root advanced upon him. Godin fired several shots at Root. A second responding officer, Michael St. Peter, also fired several shots at Root when he saw Godin retreating and potentially in danger. One of the shots appeared to hit Root. He then limped to his vehicle, parked in the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, and then fled the scene. They're saying only one shot hit him. That we know there were 15 shots fired, so he could have been hit 15 times. Maybe 14 if you want to say that the valet shot didn't hit Justin, okay. But it could have hit Justin and ricocheted potentially. But anyways, let's not even get into that. So one shot appeared to hit Root, according to this report. He then limped to his vehicle, parked in the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, and then fled the scene. Another shot fired by the officers traveled up the street and struck a hospital valet, Justin Damaris. Damaris? I don't know. I don't know how to say his name. Justin. Another Justin. Is that right? His name was Justin too. Anyways, so Root fled the scene and led police on a motor vehicle pursuit in Brookline. At the intersection of Hammond Street and Route 9, Root crashed his vehicle. Police personnel found Root near his vehicle with what they thought was a firearm. Root was shot and killed during an encounter with multiple personnel of the Boston Police and Massachusetts State Police trooper. The finding and conclusions regarding the Brookline incident were the subject of an investigation by the Norfolk District Attorney. This report deals exclusively with the events at Fenwood Road and Vining Street in Boston. So, as like I was pointing out, the other report didn't really focus so much on the Boston stuff, but here we are. All right, so the Suffolk County District Attorney commenced an investigation to determine if the firearm discharges at Fenwood Road and Vining Street were justifiable use of force, potentially deadly force, or violated the law, and whether charges should be sought. This investigation has determined that the evidence does not support charging violations of the law. This report details the investigation and evidence uncovered, findings, state of the law, and conclusions. The Boston Police Department conducted their own extensive investigation. Their investigation was conducted by Sergeant Detective John Broderick Jr., an Area B detective who is also assigned to the Firearm Discharge Investigation Team. His investigation was transparent, cooperative, and collaborative. Records and documents reviewed include tapes of radio transmissions, 911 calls, audio tapes, physical ballistics, forensic and crime scene evidence, photographs, information from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and autopsy report, police reports of earlier encounters with Root, audio and video recordings of interviews, audio and video recorded statements by all police personnel involved, audio recorded statements of civilian witnesses, and extensive video coverage of the event captured by hospital cameras. The principles of charging a re- the principles of charging require prosecutors to meet a standard of probable cause to believe a crime has been committed and ultimately that the evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt. So you need a probable cause, but also that it proves beyond a reasonable doubt? Huh? Okay. That the actor committed the crime. As detailed herein, assessment was made of the evidence involving each shooter, their recorded accounts, videos that captured the scene, and the ballistic, physical, and forensic evidence involving each. Based on the evidence, we conclude that neither of the involved officers' actions were objectively unreasonable. Accordingly, it is not appropriate to charge and the investigation should be closed without prosecution. Summary of evidence: Fenwood Road, Vining Street, Francis Street, and Binary Street from the boundaries of a block consisting of a medical building, the Shapiro Building. The Brigham and Women's Hospital main building is located where Vining Street meets Francis Street. Vining Street meets Fenwood Road 1 block away at the intersection. Fenwood Road is a two-way street and is wide enough for 2 lanes of traffic in both directions, but the lane closest to the curb on each side is used for standing or parked vehicles. It effectively becomes a single lane in both directions. The intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street is a busy intersection with a heavy flow of pedestrian and vehicle traffic. See photos 1 and 2 attached for reference. The hospital employs unarmed, uniformed security guards whose responsibilities include safeguarding hospital property, enforcing parking restrictions, and ensuring doctor, staff, and patient safety. They patrol the area by foot and in marked security vehicles equipped with turret lights. The area is heavily surveilled by numerous security cameras which have timestamps. The video evidence supports the following background facts. I can't with this camera. I'm sorry. Whoops. I'm just gonna turn it off for now. I'm just reading anyway, so apologies, but the camera is driving me crazy. Our Wi-Fi has been so slow. It went out earlier. I'm just glad it's working now. So, anywho, the area is heavily surveilled by numerous security cameras, which have timestamps. The video evidence supports the following background facts. On Friday, February 7th, 2020, at 9:13 a.m., a man subsequently identified as Justin Root parked a silver Chevy Volt in a 15-minute parking restricted area outside the entrance to 60 Fenwood Road. See photo 3 for reference. Root remained in the car for 1 minute, exited, and walked a short distance down the road and in the direction of the Brookline Avenue. Hospital security officer William Thompson, in uniform, while posted outside 60 Fenwood Road, regulating parking with a marked security vehicle, was approached by Root, who he estimated to be 6 feet tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket, dark blue baseball hat. Root stared at Thompson and came to within a foot of him. Root asked Thompson if he was calling about him on the radio. As Thompson answered that he wasn't, Root talked over him. Everyone calls 911 for no reason. Thompson thought that was something off about Root as he continued to talk. Root said the N word. He said that he was law enforcement and opened his jacket to show Thompson what Thompson described as a firearm, a clear colored a clear colored firearm in his waistband. Root wore a lanyard with clear is not a color, by the way, but anyways. Okay, so Root wore that's what I was debating with. So Root wore a lanyard with a name badge around his neck. He continued to ramble on, "Do you want to go back to work?" Thompson became concerned, so he replied yes. He noticed Root's mood to shift positively as Root replied that law enforcement is good for the right people. Root extended his hand to shake and then went back to the silver Chevy Volt. Thompson saw Root stay in his vehicle and he used his radio to call into security. So he wasn't being chased. Where was that even coming from Michael Morrissey? Nothing about him being chased, nothing about him running up to him. It said he clearly walked up to him. He approached him. Like those were the words. He walked, he approached. He walked a short distance down the road. He approached the security officer. Thompson saw Root stay in the vehicle and he used his a radio to call into security. He described Root as having a firearm. As Root drove off, Thompson followed him around the block, left on Vining Street, left on Francis Street, left on Viney Street, and then left back onto Fenway Road. At the intersection of Fenway Road and Vining Street, Root stopped the vehicle in the street travel lane and got out, leaving it in the street at the busy intersection. Root got out of the vehicle and stood next to it, leaving the driver's door open. Boston police received an emergency 911 call at 9:20 from Ron at hospital security, alerting them to a man with a gun in a holster on his hip at 60 Fenwood Road. I keep doing that, sorry. And that the firearm was out. A description was given as that of a white male, cap, black jacket, gray pants, shirt, and shoes. Officer Godin responded in his police cruiser and arrived within a minute. Officer St. Peter responded in his police cruiser and arrived within a minute. The actions of each officer of discharging their firearms were examined separately. The actions, observations, and thought process of civilian witnesses and security personnel are included for perspective. Officer David Godin's statement. Godin was on duty when he heard the radio alert that a man pulled a gun on the valet at Brigham and Women's Hospital. He asked for the call to be repeated and responded in short time. At the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, he took a left on Vining Street up to the Francis Street, where he saw Hospital Security Sergeant Troy Askew, whom he knew. Askew informed him, "That guy just pulled a gun on me," and pointed to Root, who was standing back at the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street. Godin circled the block and back to the intersection. There, he observed a silver Volt parked in the travel lane, driver's door open. He parked to the left of that car. He heard a witness alert him that someone is shooting up there. They have a gun. Did anybody really say that? Or are we just saying that for dramatic effect so that we look less guilty? Godin proceeded on foot for a few steps when he saw Root in a black jacket and black pants running down the Vining Street sidewalk to his position. Root yelled twice, "I am law enforcement. Go up there," indicating up Vining Street to the Francis Street intersection. Godin saw a firearm in Root's waistband and looked for, but did not see, a badge. Really? He looked for a badge? I find that very hard to believe. This all happened within seconds. Root was within 3 feet of Godin when Root pulled the firearm from his waistband and pointed it at him. Godin drew his firearm and yelled, "Drop the gun." Root continued to point the gun at Godin, so Godin fired his weapon. I don't know if that's true. That he could just sat there and continue to point the gun at him as he's being fired at. He thought that Root was going to kill him. Root still had the gun out, so Godin attempted to create some space between them by backing up, but fell over the curb and onto his back. He fell over his own feet. Don't let him lie to you. He thought to himself to get up or he will kill you. Once on his feet, he saw Root right on him. Godin attempted to discharge his firearm, but it jammed, and so he ejected the magazine. He didn't have another magazine nor a radio because it had fallen to the ground, so he picked up the ejected magazine and reinserted it. Root went to the vehicle. Godin could not fire again because he didn't have a good shot and he didn't want to risk a shot as there were too many people nearby. Because at that point, he probably already shot the valet in the eye. Godin was unaware, or it could have been Officer St. Peter too. Godin was unaware that Officer St. Peter was on the scene and firing at Root. Root hobbled past him to his car and left the scene. Godin went to his cruiser and alerted the dispatcher that he was involved in a shooting. "I shot him. I know that I shot him." Godin then joined the pursuit to Brookline. Godin did not recall the number of times that he discharged his firearm. Ballistics evidence reflects he discharged it 5 times. Officer Michael St. Peter's statement. St. Peter was working a detail at the hospital and arrived with his K9 at 9:15 to 9:20. Within a minute, he was approached by hospital security on Vining Street and advised that a man had flashed a gun when asked to move his car. He then heard the radio 911 alert of a person with a gun. Up at the Francis Street intersection, he saw a person waving to get his attention. As he drove up that position, Askew directed him back to the Fenwood Road intersection and he saw Root holding a firearm in his hand walking on the street sidewalk or on the Vining Street sidewalk towards Fenwood Road. Again, is it in his hand or is it in his holster? It's back and forth? No, I don't think so. All of this happened so fast. So now it's out and he's just walking around with it. Okay. I find this all very hard to believe because we know it was in his holster when Godin approached him because we can see him removing it in the video. But all these officers have to make Justin seem like much more of a threat than he really was by saying he's running around chasing people with this supposed gun. So St. Peter said he turned his cruiser around, drove back down Vining Street, and parked in the middle of the intersection. He then saw Root chasing Askew up Vining Street before coming back down the street towards the intersection. Root was walking on the Vining Street sidewalk with a firearm in his hand. He saw Root pointing the gun at someone in a struggle. He was not aware that Godin was on the scene or who was engaged with Root. St. Peter drew his firearm and yelled, "Drop the gun," twice. He was still unaware that Root was struggling with another police officer, Godin. He heard shots fired, so he discharged his weapon because of the danger involved and he thought people were going to die. He saw a man down and a radio on the ground. He saw Root grimace and limp, but Root still had the firearm. But it was shattered at that point, so there goes that argument. There were people close by, so he didn't discharge again, but continued to yell to drop the gun. Root limped to his car, got in, and drove away. St. Peter didn't shoot at the moving car. St. Peter then joined the pursuit to Brookline. St. Peter didn't recall the number of times he discharged his firearm, but ballistics evidence reflects he discharged 10 times. 10 times! He didn't even know what the hell was happening. He just pulls up on the scene and shoots 10 times at someone. He has no idea what's happening. He just shoots 10 times. So sorry about that. I have an alarm set for dinner time for the dogs, and it was that time. So sorry about that. I am back, and we're gonna just continue on where I left, or where we left off, which was a good breaking point here. So we're at the video coverage. After Thompson's encounter with Root, Root circled the block back to the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, leaving the vehicle parked in the travel lane with the door open and standing in the intersection. Security guards askew and Nihilates were responding to Thompson's radio calls and were walking from Francis Street down Vining Street. Root yelled at them, "What the F are you looking at?" Root then removed a silver gun from his waistband and charged up the middle of Vining Street at the security guards. The guards The guards fled backwards towards Francis Street. Root stopped halfway up Vining Street and put the firearm back in his waistband. This is what they're saying the video shows. I've never seen this video. Does this video exist? So he returned to the intersection. As Godin's Boston police cruiser arrived at the intersection, Root reached the cruiser and waved up towards Francis Street as if he were directing attention away from himself. Godin then circled the block. St. Peter's cruiser was traveling up Vining Street when Askew, whom Root had just chased seconds before, intercepted him and directed him to Root. When Root saw Askew directing the cruiser to his position, he chased Askew for a short distance again up Vining Street with a gun in his hand before turning and walking on the sidewalk in the direction of the Fenwood Road and Vining Street intersection. After circling the block, Godin arrived at the intersection and parked his cruiser to the left of Root's vehicle, facing the same direction. He walked on the Fenwood Street sidewalk for a few paces when he encountered Root coming from the opposite direction on the sidewalk of Vining Street. Root's right hand was on the gun in his waistband. So now it's in his waistband. You see what I'm saying? Like it's on his holster, it's in his hand, now it's in his waistband. I'm so confused. Where is the gun? Godin removed his firearm. Root said that he was law enforcement and pointed up Vining Street in the same manner that he had done so as to misdirect officers. Root had his hand on the firearm in his waistband. Root turned his back to Godin when he pointed up the street. When he turned back to Godin, he drew the gun from his waist and pointed it at Godin. He then simulated firing at Godin while advancing on him. Godin retreated and fell over backwards as Root continued to advance at him. Godin discharged his firearm in Root's direction, and St. Peter discharged his firearm in Root's direction. Root limped to his vehicle and fled the scene. Simultaneously with Godin's struggle with Root, Justin Demaris, or however you say that, a valet stationed outside of the Brigham and Women's Hospital entrance at 75 Francis Street was shot in the head. I believe it was the eye, more specifically. The hospital entrance is a short distance from the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street. William Thompson, security guard. After Thompson's earlier encounter with Root, he followed him around the block, back to the intersection. When he saw Root leave the vehicle in the intersection in the travel lane with the driver's door left open, he next saw Root run after Askew and Nilets up Vining Street, so Thompson took cover near the rear entrance of the Shapiro building at the intersection. After the second chase of Askew, he saw Root walking back down Vining Street to his position. He heard a police officer, Godin, telling Root to drop your weapon. He then saw Root take a firearm from his waistband and point it at Godin. He estimates that they were 4 feet away. He then heard what he estimates to be 3 shots fired. He saw the officer fell to the ground and Root standing over him. He then heard what he estimates were 5 or 6 more shots fired. He saw that Root was injured. He was hunched over and limping. Thompson took cover and lost sight of Root. He never saw Root drive away. Troy Askew. So they did a bunch of interviews of civilian witnesses and people around the area that we didn't get to see in the Norfolk County DA's report. They didn't put like one witness statement and something else, I think, or maybe 2 witness statements in theirs, but that was about it. All right, so the next person, Troy Askew, is a hospital security sergeant. Askew received a call from Thompson that he had encountered a man with a gun and needed assistance. After Thompson informed him that Root circled the block in his car, he saw Root at the intersection with a silver gun in his hand. Root then ran at him and security officer Lawrence Nilets. Root was yelling at them, "I am going to shoot you. What are you looking at?" Boston police cruiser Godin arrived and he informed him of the situation and pointed to Root. Root started to chase up Vining Street at Askew again. Askew saw that Root continued to have the gun out. He then heard Godin yell to put the weapon down. He then heard what he estimates to be 7 to 10 shots fired. He took cover. John McMullen. McMullen is a security officer for the Department of Mental Health at 20 Vining Street. From his vantage point, which he estimates to be 30 to 40 yards away, he saw Boston police near the intersection and heard yelling, "Put the gun down." He saw Root with a firearm. He thought that Root fired a number of times from a distance of 5 feet away from the police car and 15 to 20 feet from the officer. He heard police return fire. That would be so the original shots that he thought he heard that were Justin, that would be Godin's shots. And then the return fire would likely be St. Peter shots. All of those shots, law enforcement. This is a doctor. Dr. Redacted. Dr. Redacted is a brain surgeon at the hospital. She was stopped in her blue Porsche, ooh, lovely, a blue Porsche at the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street. She saw a Boston police cruiser with flashing lights traveling on Vining Street to Francis Street, followed by a security vehicle that stopped in the intersection. She saw Root emerge from behind a truck on Vining Street. Root had a gun that she estimates was longer than a pistol, firing 3 to 5 times at officers. So this just shows how bad eyewitness statements are because he didn't have a gun and he couldn't have fired at officers. Officers exchanged fire with what she estimates were 5 shots. She thought that Root and Godin were both went down. They did. After a brief pause, another officer fired several times. She then saw a plainclothes officer with a gun out on Vining Street. She then maneuvered her vehicle through the intersection left the scene. This is just redacted. Redacted was walking through the Fenwood Road and Vining Street intersection. She saw a car parked in the travel lane and Root standing next to it. She heard him yell and pull a big army gun out. Okay. When she saw two security officers running away up Vining Street, she ran into the Shapiro building and took cover. What she estimates to be 5 minutes later, she heard 5 shots fired. I don't know what a big army gun is. He had a clear plastic toy gun. And this next witness is also redacted, and they were walking on Vining Street to the intersection at Fenwood Road. She saw Root standing by his car with the door open in the intersection. She saw Root holding a large gun. A large gun. We all know that it was a clear plastic paintball gun. We see it in the videos, yet we're going to still play it off like he's got a gun. Okay. A large gun pointing it at security guards and chasing after them up Vining Street. She ran into the Shapiro building for cover and heard what she estimates were 4 to 6 shots fired. The next witness saw Root's vehicle left unattended at the Fenwood Road intersection. He saw Root running up Vining Street with a gun in his hand. He then saw Root return to his vehicle. He saw Root fire 4 to 5 times at what he believed were security personnel. The gun had a plastic cover. Security fired back. Root then limped to his vehicle and drove off. Next eyewitness, also redacted, thought it was 8:50 a.m. when he heard the radio call of a gun shooter walking down Vining Street. From approximately 75 feet away, he saw Root walking near 60 Fenwood Road. An officer walked in Root's direction up Vining Street. He saw Root open his jacket and he could see a gun. The officer was screaming at him. Root pulled the gun and shot at the officer from 5 feet away. This person went into the building lobby and announced that there was an active shooter. This witness thought Root's firearm looked like a .45 caliber. Again, it was clear and larger than a gun, larger than a handgun. This person was in the vehicle stopped at the intersection. He saw a car parked opposite of him. He saw Root with a firearm out near 60 Fenwood Road. He saw Root then run up Vining Street. He then back to the intersection to engage in shooting with police. Again, he wasn't shooting police. There was no shootout with police. He saw Root and the officer both go down. He saw Root go to the vehicle. He thought the gun was a 10 to 12-inch handgun. This person used his cell phone to take pictures of Root with his gun. He also used his cell phone to video the police engaging Root. So this guy's got video of the Boston scene. The video and the photo will be discussed in further context. All right. This person, next eyewitness, was in her vehicle stopped in the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street. This is also a doctor. This doctor saw Root run into the intersection shooting. Well, that just can't be true because he didn't do that and it's not on camera. So where are they getting these witnesses? And what are they saying? Because I don't necessarily think that they're truthful, or maybe they think they saw something, but what was really happening wasn't what they saw, or something along those lines. Okay, so she said that she heard shots, but was not certain of the number. Okay, so she saw Root shooting in the intersection apparently, which never even happened. There was nothing in the intersection. He fell next to Godin near the intersection and then got up and got into his car, but that he wasn't shooting anyone in the intersection. All right, this next one was in the first floor office in the Shapiro building overlooking the Fenwood Road and Vining Street intersection. He heard a shot followed by 2 to 3 shots. He looked out a window, and from a distance of 25 feet away, he saw a security vehicle and two Boston police officers, or police cars, sorry. He saw the exchange of shots. He saw something in Root's right hand, as Root limped to his vehicle and drive away up Fenwood Road in the direction of Huntington Avenue. He saw the evidence left in the street, specifically a radio, a baton, two magazines, and bloodstains. So that would be Root's blood and possibly even the valet's blood. And when Godin dropped his radio and his baton and the magazines for his gun, that's what this witness saw in the street. This next witness was at the hospital bridge on Francis Street, up the street from the intersection of Fenwood and Vining. He heard 4 to 5 pops and looks out a window and saw a vehicle driving away very fast. So he was a useless witness. This person operates the security camera system for the hospital. They were parking his vehicle. He was parking his vehicle in Fenwood when he saw officers approach the intersection. He saw Root dressed in all black pull out a strange looking firearm. Well, at least this person said it's strange looking as opposed to, oh, yeah, it's just a really large gun and I just saw him shooting. When in reality, none of that happened. And at least this person was like, yeah, it was a strange looking firearm. He's not saying specifically that it was a gun that he saw. He heard yells to stop. He saw Root fire and the officer fall to the ground. He heard the officer return fire. Return fire at what? Return means somebody fired at him first, but that didn't happen. So who is writing this report? And I mean, these are in the words of the officers writing their own report. So he heard the officer return fire. Well, return fire means you're doing it in reaction to something. So this implies that Justin was the one who engaged in shooting first. So words matter in these reports. And when you're reading through this stuff and the way that they word things, it's misleading. It's very deceptive. So, anyways, he heard the officer, quote, return fire, yelling at Root to stop. He then saw Root run to his vehicle. Next, this person's name is in here, and he is Pedro Hernandez. Hernandez is a hospital security officer. He was driving on Francis Street near the hospital when he saw a skew in Nilet's, or however you say that, Nilet's, running on Vining and Francis Streets. He next saw a police officer with a gun out. He parked his vehicle on Vining Street and walked towards the intersection of Fenwood Road. He drew his firearm and showed his badge to the officer near the intersection. He then saw Root in a gray jacket with a gun. He heard shots and saw Root go to a vehicle in the intersection. The shots sounded different. He then helped safeguard the scene and evidence at the intersection. Hernandez was legally carrying a Glock 9mm with 9 rounds. Hernandez stated that he did not discharge his weapon. Ballistic analysis of the weapon and discharged shell casings at the scene confirms his statement. Next, we have Kyla Nieder. I'm going to say Nieder. Is a detective with hospital security. She heard the initial Thompson radio transmission of a firearm and the need for police assistance. From her office within the hospital, she watched video that captured the earlier encounter between Root and Thompson. She watched the video of Root lifting his shirt to display a firearm in his waistband. She then broadcast over the radio system a description of Root. She then watched the camera in real time and saw Root at the intersection of Fenwood and Vining. She saw a firearm in his right hand. She heard security personnel over the radio that say that Root was shooting at the Boston police and chasing us. We know that's not true. The chasing part, I didn't see video. They're describing it as chasing. It may have been he was excitedly trying to get someone's attention. I have no idea. But to say that he's chasing and shooting people up with a gun, this is not what happened at all. And that's what this report is making it seem like. And I just want to say it's very misleading. So this Kyla Nieder, she then announced that the hospital was to be locked down. She learned that a hospital valet at 75 Francis Street had been shot, so she went and secured the scene. Next eyewitness is Octavia Simmons. Simon Simmons. Simmons is a hospital security officer. He was at the triage area of the hospital on Francis when he heard the radio transmission of a man with a gun. He saw Nailitz running backwards on Vining Street towards Francis. He then heard shots fired and saw the valet lying on the ground outside the hospital entrance, bleeding from the head. Simmons estimated that he heard 4 to 5 shots. All these people are saying that they heard only a few shots, when in reality, we know Godin fired 5 and St. Peter fired 10. So there were 15 in total, 2 separate instances of firings, so there was a break in between. So whoever, all these eyewitnesses who are like, yeah, you returned fire, no, that was the first thing that they heard. The first round of shots they heard was Godin shooting at Justin. And then the second round of shots was obviously St. Peter shooting at Justin. None of those were Justin. All right. Next witness was at the 75 Francis Street Emergency Department when he heard Thompson's radio broadcast of a man with a gun. He heard shots. He saw the valet on the ground bleeding from the head in front of the emergency department door. He heard a radio transmission of shots fired, so he took cover. Rufus Royer is a sergeant with the Department of Mental Health Police. There's a Department of Mental Health Police? Are they what? Department of Mental Health Police. So the Department of Mental Health has its own police department? Is that, or they hire their own I don't know. That's confusing. It almost seems like they're policing mental health, but that would be completely, I don't know how you could do that. So they have to be police for the Department of Mental Health, I'm assuming. All right, so at the intersection of Fenwood and Vining Street, he saw a car left in the intersection travel lane and Root standing by the car. His observations were from a distance of 20 yards away. He saw the arrival of Boston police and a hospital security sergeant walking towards the intersection. Root was yelling to police, "That's him," twice. And then Root pulls something and the security sergeant run back up the street towards Francis Street. He could see Root in the intersection with a gun on his belt. Royer thought to himself that this man looked a lot like DMH client who he knew as Root. This man knew Root. He knew Justin from Justin's interactions at the Department of Mental Health. So he saw Root point the gun at a police officer and fire. The officer went down. The officer returned several shots. A second officer fired several shots. Again, with the officer return several shots. Root stumbled. The officers were yelling to drop the gun. Root then went to his car and left the scene, followed by the police cruisers. So they followed him in the chase. Royer stated that the firearm looked handmade, grayish, and tubular. Well, now that we know it was a BB gun, we know that that's why it looked so odd or strange. It did not look real, almost like a toy. Damn, this is like the first witness that is telling us truth here. Royer just, and he knows Root. So, I mean, what does that tell you? All these other witnesses could be they wanted to see something happen, so they're like, "Oh, it was crazy. I saw this guy chasing and there was a gun," and even though they didn't see that. Or um I don't know. It's even possible that the law enforcement is embellishing or could have swayed some particular statements a certain way because it happens often and we just don't know it. Royer described the man as 6'3", with a thin build, short hair, and baseball cap on, and a beige sweater. Royer knows Root because of an incident 10 years ago when Root had a fake gun at Shattuck Hospital. That's how I would pronounce it. I'm sure that's incorrect, but that's how a Chicagoan would pronounce a Massachusetts town without knowing what it sounds like. They had to section him. So 10 years ago, Root had a fake gun at this other hospital. They had to section him. Police may think Root's firearm to be real and have to shoot him. That was a quote from Royer. This next witness is employed as a valet and was assigned to the main plaza area of the hospital on Francis Street. The main plaza area is covered as a covered outdoor pickup and drop-off area for the hospital. He was standing in the travel lane when he noticed a police cruiser come to the intersection of Francis and Vining. He saw the cruiser do a U-turn and go back down Vining from where it had just come from. He then heard a pop, followed by what he estimates were four more pops, and he felt immediate pain to his head. He likened the feeling to being hit in the head with a baseball bat. He fell to the ground and heard someone say that he was shot. This person survived the shooting. Autopsy. An autopsy of Root was performed by Dr. Christina Stanley of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Of relevance to this investigation were her findings that Root had a number of gunshot wounds, including those to his hips, pelvis, and both thighs. Given witness accounts and video coverage of Root not having a limp before engaging with Godin as compared with Root hopping to his vehicle after the encounter with Godin and St. Peter discharges in Godin's belief that he shot Root, it is reasonable. So Godin believes he shot Root. St. Peter says he fired 10 rounds. So it is reasonable to assume that at least one of the aforementioned wounds were probably the result of Godin and St. Peter discharging their firearms. At least one. There's at 14 chance, or I'm sorry, there's 15 uh, rounds fired, and of each one fired, that's one more of a chance that he could have been hit. So he could have had 15 wounds up to. All right. The evidence recovered at the scene. So the evidence. Oh, I'm not going to read through all of this. These were things that it's just a listing of what was found in his vehicle. So he had cartridge with head stamp. I don't know what that means. A Glock 40 magazine with 15 live cartridges, brass colored pendant, copper jacketed projectile and fragments. So uh, all of the things that were there in the Boston scene would have been so even the magazine and the the radio and the things, if the officer didn't pick it up and if he left it there, then the baton and the flashlight, those things that were left at the Brook or at the Boston scene, that would be evidence that they would have collected. All right, so ballistics analysis. Ballistics evidence reflects that both officers discharged their firearms. St. Peter did so utilizing his department issued Glock 40 caliber handgun. Ballistics evidence reflects he discharged 10 times. Godin was in possession of a department issued Glock 40 caliber handgun, but it was not his. If you remember, this firearm was not issued to him and was issued to another officer. An investigation revealed that he had inadvertently taken possession of the weapon after a mix up at a station lockup. He inadvertently took possession of the weapon after a mix up at a station lockup. How does that happen? I want to know. A number of gun lockers outside the booking area at the Area B2 station could be opened with the same key. Apparently, either Godin or another officer accessed the wrong locker with the key that worked, giving them access. The mix up resulted in Godin having his Glock and another officer having possession of Godin's department issued Glock. Okay, so maybe it makes sense that it could happen to one of them, but both of them? So both of them had the other's guns. That doesn't make sense that it was, wouldn't you know what lockbox you used or locker or whatever? They're using a locker. So wouldn't you know what locker you used? And if for whatever reason you've got a key that goes into multiple lockers, that makes no sense why that would be, because what's the point of having separate lockers? But then now one of them is taking an incorrect locker, opening the incorrect locker, and taking an incorrect firearm. Well, then the next officer is going to come along looking for that same locker that they put their firearm in and it's missing, right? So how did it get mixed up that both of them have it? Is what I'm saying. Like both of them have each other's guns. I think that that's not what happened. I think that this whole key locker switcheroony thing, I think that that's just not true if you're trying to use common sense. It just doesn't make sense to me. Moving on. So ballistics evidence reflects he discharged his weapon 5 times. Two live cartridges at the scene were microscopically examined and determined that they were ejected from the firearm in Godin's attempt to clear his weapon when it jammed. The projectile recovered from Damaris was consistent with ammunition fired from Godin and St. Peter's firearms. That's the Damaris is the security officer that got shot. Given the video depiction of body position, angle, and direction, it is probable that one of Godin's discharges resulted in the gunshot wound suffered by the security officer. So it's likely Godin. So most of this is on Godin. Why is Godin not facing charges or some kind of disciplinary action for taking the wrong gun, not following protocol? St. Peter didn't either, especially when or not St. Peter, McMenemy is the one that did the pit maneuver. So why are these people, and he kicked him. He kicked Root. None of this was uh considered misconduct or anything like that. So whatever. All right, so the next section is camera systems and video. I'm not going to read through all of these. There was video taken and captured all over the place. It goes through a timeline here, which I will read through quickly. It says a timeline was established using the camera recording timestamps starting with the Root Thompson encounter on the sidewalk outside of 60 Fenwood Road. The timestamp for each camera was found to differ from other cameras. So, how do you even know if they're accurate? We've got 9:12. A car pulls up and parks in the lane closest to 60 Fenwood Road. At 9:14, Root gets out of the car and walks to Thompson on the sidewalk outside of Fenwood Road. 9:15, Root and Thompson shake hands. So how threatened was Thompson if they're ending the conversation by shaking hands? Shortly thereafter, Root gets back into his car. At 9:17, Root drives away. At 9:17, and some seconds later, Thompson is on the radio. Then there's more camera footage here. At 9:20, Root drives back to the intersection of Fenwood and Vining, leaves his car in the travel lane out of car. He's out of the car now, standing in the intersection with his door left open. At 9:21, Root enters the doorway for 60 Fenwood Road, but does not go into the building. At 9:21 and 49 seconds, hospital security guards walking down Vining towards Fenwood and Vining Street. At 9:21:57 seconds, Root runs up Vining Street. At 9:22 and 5 seconds, Boston Police Cruiser Officer Godin inside arrives at the intersection and takes a left turn up Vining. At 9:22:13, Root's feet are visible as he gestures and directs the cruiser up the street. At 9:22:17, Root puts what appears to be a firearm in his waistband and walks towards his vehicle. 9:22:25, Boston Police Cruiser with St. Peter inside comes up Vining and Root gestures him up the street. 9:22:42, security vehicle with Bill Thompson inside, right, Bill? Whatever, Thompson inside with emergency vehicles or emergency lights, and he pulls into and stops in the intersection. 9:22:45, guards running back towards Francis Street with Root in pursuit. 9:22:47, St. Peter's Cruiser does a U-turn on Vining and drives back to the intersection. 9:22:53, Root stops pursuit, puts something in his waistband, and walks back to intersection of Fenwood and Vining. At 9:22:57, Godin's cruiser arrives at an intersection. Root points up towards Francis Street. 9:23:07, Godin leaves his cruiser at the intersection, walks several steps to Vining Street, and is confronted by Root. Root has a firearm in his right hand and points it at Godin. Godin backs up, falls backward. St. Peter has his firearm out, shielded behind his cruiser. It appears that he fires several times. Damaris at 9:23:10 is shot in front of 75 Francis Street. The security guard gets shot in the eye. 9:23:16, Root limps back to his car, has a gun in his hand, no hat. St. Peter trains his weapon on Root but does not appear to fire. At 9:23:47, Godin leaves the scene in his cruiser to give chase, followed by St. Peter. So I'll stop there because that's the Boston scene, so we don't need to get into all the other actions there. So here is the legal standard. We're almost done. Just a little bit more of this. So here's the legal standard. The actions of the involved officers by discharging their firearms are guided by applicable case law and legal precedent concerning the use of deadly force. To be lawful, the use of deadly force by an officer must be objectively reasonable, given the totality of the circumstances known to the officer. The United States Supreme Court has stated the reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer. So it has to be from the officer's perspective at the scene rather than the 2020 vision of hindsight. So that is what they're going to be hanging their hat on. well, if we had known, it would have changed the way we did things, but since we didn't know all the things, then, we just did it how we were going to do it, and that's how we should have done it. Even though there were tons of other things I could have done to de-escalate the situation first before going in and just shooting. The calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. Graham versus Connor says in that if police officers are justified in firing at a suspect in order to end a severe threat to the public safety, the officers need not stop shooting until the threat has ended. So if they think that there's a threat to public safety, they can keep shooting until that person is no longer alive. And there's case law to support them doing this, which is scary because it's so subjective. This is some of these things are so subjective. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court has held that a police officer has an obligation to protect his fellow officers and the public at large, such that retreat or escape is not a viable option for an officer faced with a potential threat of violence. The actions of each officer that discharged his firearm were examined separately, applying this case law. The actions, observations, and thought process of other witnesses were included for perspective. So basically, we did nothing wrong. We looked at it from this angle, and the officers acted in good faith because they didn't, they thought that they were doing the right thing, even though their training should have taught them to de-escalate with multiple other uh, techniques. All right, so here's some background information on Justin. Root was 41 years old, residing in Mattapan. Root's criminal history includes, and that is redacted for his privacy. This history reflects his impersonating law enforcement and CIA military personnel. He had been found to be in possession or of replica firearms, fake badges, and handcuffs. Family members had a history of notifying police that Root was not in compliance with his medication regimen uh, or regime, and they were concerned for his mental state. At the Brookline scene, if I could speak. At the Brookline scene, a plastic black replica of a firearm was found close to where Root's body came to rest. Another replica was found in Root's vehicle. Another replica with a damaged barrel was found in the vehicle. They're saying see certain photos to compare. At the intersection of Fenwood Road and Vining Street, a number of black and clear plastic pieces, a black cylindrical piece of plastic and metal spring were recovered. These were pieces of the gun that shattered in his hand. Based on witnesses' descriptions of the firearm held by Root and video evidence, it is reasonable to assume that these pieces were part of the replica that Root pointed at Godin and was damaged during the confrontation. So they admit that the gun that he was carrying was damaged. So that would mean that he didn't have a gun at the scene in Brookline, because this is the Boston scene that they found these pieces. Body worn cameras. St. Peter was working a detail and not wearing a department issued body worn camera. Godin was on active duty and had a department issued body worn camera in his possession. He did not affix it to his body and left it powered off in his duty bag in the cruiser. Godin explained that his practice was to not affix it to his body until he gets a call. We know this is now a lie, but that's uh, what he told them initial in the initial investigation, the initial interviews. He told them it wasn't on, it was in his duty bag. Well, more of the investigation when was underway, and then they found more evidence, and they found a body worn camera of somebody else, which showed Godin taking his body worn camera off and throwing it in his vehicle, which means he had it on him affixed to his body. He took it off when he arrived at the Brookline scene. So why would you take it off? One would ask. But he was caught red-handed doing that. Again, no repercussions for these officers who have clearly violated protocol. An Axion device audit trail reflects that Godin's device was activated at 8:08 a.m. for a call and powered off at 9:13. There was no evidence that video was deleted, nor were attempts made to delete or modify the device. Well, that's because he didn't have it on. He didn't turn it on. The lack of body-worn camera videos from Godin and St. Peter is offset by the extensive camera footage from the numerous hospital vantage points. No, it's not, because all officers should have body-worn cameras. Here are their conclusions. As you can tell where this is going, probably, you can tell, they found no fault. So, based on the facts known to each of the officers at the time of the incident and the law regarding the use of deadly force, the evidence reflects that Root initiated an attack by pointing what appeared to be a firearm at Godin. Godin was in a vulnerable position, but had been informed by several witnesses that Root had a firearm. Exactly. So, why did you go right up to the guy instead of, taking cover and or engaging in conversation from a distance and being careful? Instead, no, he just goes face to face with them and then overreacts when he sees Root move his hand. All right, so St. Peter had been informed that Root had a firearm, saw the struggle, leaving a person on the ground on their back, and he thought serious injury, death could occur. Both officers were justified in returning fire. Again, with the returning fire, there was no original fire. So what are they returning? Both officers were justified in returning fire to protect themselves and others nearby. Their actions were in response to the immediate threat of death or serious injury from Root, who seemingly discharged a firearm several times at the direction of Godin. Seemingly fired his gun several times. Gimme a freaking break. Even after the initial return fire, Root continued to point the gun at officers. Despite the confusion that neither officer was aware of the other officer's presence, each had the impression that Root was actually firing at Godin, so each returned fire. The gunshots they heard were actually gunshots by the other officer. Godin, not aware of St. Peter's presence, heard gunshots from St. Peter and thought that Root was firing at him. So don't you think that, being an officer, you should know your surroundings, and especially if there are other officers near you? Don't you think? St. Peter, not aware that Godin was the person on the ground, saw Root approaching Godin, pointing a firearm at Godin. He heard gunshots from Godin and thought that Root was firing at Godin. Under the circumstances, the use of deadly force was a lawful and reasonable exercise of self-defense. Self-defense against an unarmed man. They needed to defend themselves against an unarmed man using deadly force. Each shooter acted in self-defense and defense of others at the scene. Godin was made aware that Root had a firearm. Saw Root point a firearm at him. heard a shot, fell to the ground, and saw Root point the firearm and shoot at him from mere feet away. Shoot, like in quotes. He thought that Root shot at him, fine. But when you're not injured and there was no firing other than your own gun, when are you going to realize that he didn't shoot you? And when does it stop? When does the chase stop after that? They just keep pursuing him. St. Peter was made aware that Root had a firearm, saw some of the struggle resulting with a person on the ground on his back, and Root pointing a gun at the person and firing. Root's firearm was actually a replica in